From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Puts Canada on a deadline. Will the trade pact get done?
NAFTA discussions restart with Canada around dairy. We'll have that from the Farm Progress Show.
What happens to grain markets if trade fights quickly disappear?
It's that export demand for soybeans that have really brought all of these markets lower.
Could net farm income hit levels that agriculture saw in the 1980s? We'll have that story coming up today on AgDay.
And targeting tourists with tomatoes.
I don't know how many ketchup you can make out of it, but it's delicious.
AgDay, brought to you by the Chevy Silverado, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickups on the road.
Good morning, I'm Betsy Gibbon. Clinton Griffiths will check in with us from Farm Progress Show later. The clock is ticking as the U.S. continues to pressure Canada to strike a NAFTA deal with a strict deadline of Friday. Canadian officials in Washington resuming trade talks on a timeline to either work out differences the two countries have on several topics, potentially cave to U.S. demands, or see if the administration is willing to give something up for a completed deal by Friday. U.S. officials and counterparts from Mexico completed an understanding Monday, which excludes Canada. After 2 days of intensive talks, Canadian officials saying it's going to be an important and constructive week.
Mexico has made some significant concessions, particularly in the area of labor and of rules of origin on cars. For our government, good jobs for working people in Canada has always been our priority, and these concessions really are going to be valuable for workers in Canada and in the United States.
Dairy is one of the sticking points between the U.S. and Canada in a revamped deal. President Trump criticizing the Canadian dairy quota system, also known as supply management, which controls dairy expansion to dairy farmers. Canada is not expected to budge when it comes to restructuring its system, and Washington correspondent Jim Wiesmeyer says it will more than likely stay in place for dairy producers in Canada. Yet U.S. officials are insisting on some market access gains to the country.
In Ontario and Quebec are two main dairy producing provinces, with so many votes being, really the Liberals need those votes in the next election. I think they're going to be willing to be flexible. The Prime Minister has said numerous times, hey, we need to be flexible on supply management. That means, I think, some increased market access for the U.S., but at the same time still holding the pillars of supply management in place.
Haney says he does not see Canada opening up all imports of U.S. dairy, but a deal may happen if Canada sways with its import quota, the size of the tariff on U.S. dairy products, and if the country makes adjustments to Class 7 regulations. Trade talks are top of mind for Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue, who spoke Wednesday at Farm Progress Show. Clinton Griffiths joins us from Boone, Iowa.
Betsy, as we mentioned yesterday, trade a major part of the conversation here at Farm Progress Show. To hear that we have a framework now with Mexico, well, that's encouraging many people that we may actually see a deal get done. But dairy, it does remain a major sticking point. To hear that talks have restarted between the U.S. and Canada over dairy, well, that's encouraging, folks, that we may see a NAFTA deal soon.
But I've heard the president talk about it too much, and I think using a technique like the Class 7 milk to get around the rules of NAFTA and be able to mess up the market for the rest of the world needs to be approached, and they need to fix that problem. And I think they need to come to the table and have a good conversation about how we do that so that we can be fair to our Canadian neighbors too. We just want to make sure it's fair going back and forth.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue also on hand at the Farm Progress Show, talking trade progress and NAFTA.
We're not asking Canada to do away totally with their supply management system, but if they're going to continue, we want them to manage the supply. And that's essentially what happened when they started dumping this Class 7 milk on the international market and depressed prices internationally. That helps our farmers and our dairymen, and it put a lot of pressure on there and a lot of stress price-wise across the country overall. So I'm hopeful from the news earlier this morning and from talking with Ambassador Lighthizer yesterday that we're going to get a good agreement for agriculture with Canada.
Betsy, it sounds like pressure is building for Canada to come to the table and agree to a deal as the Trump administration holds that Mexican agreement as leverage in these negotiations. They're hoping to reach a deal as soon as possibly this week. We'll see if that happens. Back to you.
Well, there are struggles on the farm. The U.S. economy as a whole is growing. The Commerce Department says the economy had a strong 4.2% growth rate during the last fiscal quarter. The government says that's the best showing in nearly 4 years. Strength in business investment offset slightly slower consumer spending. Economists expect growth to slow to a still solid 3% annual rate the rest of the year. Later today, USDA will release its latest forecast on farm income. The department updates these numbers 3 times a year. With a stagnant grain price, product tariffs, and uncertain trade deals, the outlook is not likely to be favorable for farmers. Tyne Morgan takes a look.
Thanks, Betsy. Well, as financial pain ripples across farm country, it's a grim reality for some here at the Farm Progress Show. That's as USDA's recently announced tariff relief aid package could provide some short-term relief.
But when you look at the numbers, it looks like it's a big number, but you see what's happening out in farmland. It is just a Band-Aid, and it will help a lot of our farmers get through this crop and get prepared for a crop next year. But a lot of them that are more financially unstable, it's not going to be a whole lot for them.
USDA's most recent net farm income projection from February pegs income to fall to a 12-year low to $49.5 billion. That's after a slight rebound in 2017. Trade issues are pressuring commodity prices, which is adding to the bleak outlook.
So it starts to add uncertainty. It starts to an uncertainty in the commodity markets is translating into lower grain prices, which is lower net farm income, lower cash receipts. And we're starting to sort of see the weight of this show up.
USDA is scheduled to give an updated look at net farm income projections. That's just 5 days after the agency revealed how much the tariff aid package will pay out to farmers.
The trade aid will help offset some of this, but the USDA already said it's an $11 billion hit to the farm economy. We're already in a difficult situation, so $11 billion off the top could put us closer to crisis levels that we last saw in the 1980s.
Widmar says the question becomes whether USDA will include the tariff aid in its updated outlook.
We're at a low spot. Historically speaking, we're at a low spot, and so if we just took $11 billion right off the top, we'd be back at those 1980 levels. We have that trade aid to offset it, but again, the ag economy's had a lot of development. So we'll see what the USDA says.
West Virginia's Dr. David Cole says today's situation is already revealing similarities to the 1980s. However, economic hardships are happening more slowly than 30 years ago.
This one I call the grinder, and it's having a real impact not only on the financial, but also the emotions of agriculture producers out there. And again, there seems to be a surprise around every corner.
Cole says the net farm income pie is changing.
But the key is it's smaller incomes, but what we're finding is a certain group of producers are getting a higher percentage of the smaller income, and those people generally have a higher business IQ.
Again, that updated look at net farm income expected to come out later this week, but in talking to farmers here at Farm Progress Show, they tell me lower commodity prices are pushing profits lower on their farm today. Reporting from Farm Progress Show in Boone, Iowa, I'm Tyne Morgan for AgDay.
Mike Hoffman is joining us now for a look at crop comments. Mike?
Good morning, Betsy. It's been a wet couple of days in pockets of Wisconsin. Naomi Bloom near West Bend, Wisconsin, sending us a picture of her 2 boys making the most out of receiving 5 inches of rain in 48 hours. And David Womack from Shelbyville, Tennessee, sending us this picture of his corn crop. USDA says 73% of the state's corn crop is rated good to excellent. David expects his yield to be well below last year, though. And taking a look at the wind speed forecast, northern and central plains will start off on the windy side as a system starts to come together over that area. It only picks up during the day back into the west as well. Heading into the day tomorrow, it'll be a little breezy from western Wisconsin down into Oklahoma to start the day, and of course those winds pick up across many parts of the plains in the west as we head through the afternoon hours. We'll have your forecast coming up. First, here are some hometown temps.
Your next piece of equipment is on MachineryPete.com. Search equipment from dealerships across the country to find what you're looking for. Only on MachineryPete.com.
What happens to grain markets if trade squabbles between China, Mexico, and Canada and other partners go away? We'll look at that scenario next in Agribusiness. Plus, you're going to need some heavy-duty detergent to get stains out of these clothes following this annual food fight in Europe.
Join Andrew McRae for Farming the Countryside, a farmer-focused podcast that is all about production agriculture. Farming the Countryside is available wherever you listen to your favorite podcast and is brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services.
Wheat futures had a strong showing Wednesday, closing up 18 cents. Some analysts believe it was in response to possible wheat export limits by Russia. The country has struggled with drought and expected wheat production is down 20%.
The way the numbers work out is like this. USDA currently projects that Russia will export 35 million metric tons of wheat. The chatter here this week is that Russia may put some sort of tax on exports if they exceed 25 million metric tons. So that would leave you with a 10 million metric ton hole essentially, which could come to the United States. That's business that could very well come to the U.S. and that may be part of the reason why the market was up here.
With trade talk taking center stage, what if trade disputes are resolved soon? We rejoin Clinton Griffiths from Farm Progress Show.
Elaine Cubb, author of Mastering the Grain Markets, our guest for analysis today. Elaine, as we look at the overall grain markets, there's so much talk about this trade issues and the weight that it's putting on our markets. What's your take on any potential movement here for grains?
Well, soybeans are the ones that are most affected by it. We've noticed even with the negotiations with Mexico, that's good news for corn, but corn doesn't really respond because that was never really the big problem with domestic corn demand. It's that export demand for soybeans that have really brought all of these markets lower. So
Sure.
There is a lot of potential, I think, if anything ever gets normalized, that soybean market could normalize very quickly.
Yeah, you know, and we talk a little bit about, you know, the weight, and the USDA's looked at it and they said, okay, well, you know, it's $1.65 is what we're going to put in for trade support. Is that the number that we're seeing as far as weight on these markets, or no?
I think the total drawdown on the futures prices was $1.90, and that 165 only goes towards 50% of
Sure.
bushels, right? So
Right.
it is what it is, and that $1.90, I think we could justify even bringing it lower as the Brazilian currency continues to weaken. So there's additional bearishness still coming into the soybean market at this point in time. And that, yeah, tariff aid wouldn't be enough to make anybody whole.
Yeah, I guess the other side of this coin is the production that we're having here at home. It is a big crop. We've planted a lot of acres. Yields look good so far. Where does this take us as we get through 2018 in prices?
Well, I think we have a lot of danger right now on the chart. The last time I looked at the chart, the new crop November soybean contract was within 10 cents of its July low. And I think if we took that out because of any more bearishness from production prospects, perhaps a bushel per acre bump in the yield even, if anything like that did take out that July low, I think there's potential for it to continue lower in a dramatic fashion, or like I mentioned, to continue higher in a dramatic fashion if the trade gets normalized. I think there's potential for volatility in soybeans for sure.
But if trade gets normalized, we could see this snap back up.
Yeah, and I think you can see some hints of that in the soybean futures spreads in the last half of 2019. Those are really quite tight and suggest that the commercial market is expecting these soybeans to move.
All right, appreciate it, Elaine. Thank you so much. We'll be back with more Ag Day in just a minute.
For more marketing advice, you can find Elaine's book, Mastering the Grain Markets, How Profits Are Really Made, on Amazon and elsewhere.
Welcome back to Ag Day with meteorologist Mike Hoffman. Mike, we've received some rain over in pockets of the Corn Belt. Will that rain continue?
Well, it looks like the western Corn Belt's going to see this next system start to move eastward. The eastern system kind of moving away, though. And we also have an area of low pressure system sitting in the Gulf of Mexico, kind of going to meander there for a while. Over the next couple of weeks, we get into the heart of hurricane season, though, so we'll have to watch everything along the east coast and also the Gulf Coast. But in the meantime, we'll be watching this system coming eastward. You can see out ahead of that warm front, or near the warm front, there will be a few showers and thunderstorms, Oklahoma, southern Missouri, and then along the cold front farther east toward the mid-Atlantic. But this is a big dome of comfortable air over the Great Lakes in the northeast. as we head through this afternoon. Heading into the nighttime hours tonight, then we'll begin to moisten up the northern plains. Showers and thunderstorms developing in places across those areas. Heading through the day tomorrow, then we will see even a little bit more starting to develop across the northeastern plains, especially Minnesota, down into parts of Iowa as we head into the afternoon and evening hours tomorrow. Just hit and miss stuff in the southwest, a little bit less than you typically see this time of the year. But you can see this system, our model's trying to show it getting a little bit organized. So just something we have to watch, nothing immediate, nothing that we're too concerned about quite yet. Precipitation estimate over the past 24 hours, you can see some amounts in Florida over towards southeast Texas. Also along that cool front from the central Mississippi Valley into the northeast. Adding in the next 36 hours, we're going to add a little bit more in some of those same areas, plus the mid-Atlantic area down into parts of the eastern Tennessee Valley and the northern Mississippi Valley. You can see everything west of there mainly staying dry, just a few showers in the Pacific Northwest. Temperatures this afternoon still hot from Oklahoma and Texas southward, but look at these comfortable 70s, most of the Corn Belt, even some 60s for high temperatures in the central and northern Great Lakes. Low temperatures tonight going to drop into the 50s and 60s in most of the Corn Belt. You can see that's still muggy though from southern Kansas southward. And the warmth tries to come back northward a little bit, back into the much of Kansas, southeastern Nebraska as we head through tomorrow afternoon. Still very comfortable, though, the Great Lakes into the northeast. And here's the jet stream. You can see as we head through time, another little trough tries to come into the Great Lakes. It kind of gets beaten back, though, so the ridge builds back in next week. That'll bring the heat back to those areas that have cooled down. That's a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. We head to Denver, Colorado, first of all, partly sunny and rather hot, high of 91 degrees. Lafayette, Indiana, pleasant with lots of sunshine, a high 77. And Providence, Rhode Island, partly sunny, an afternoon shower or thunderstorm, high of 89.
Ahead in Drover's TV, a notorious disease appears in a Florida beef herd, plus the growing financial frustration in finding enough workers on the farm. And in Spain, they have their running of the bulls, as well as their tossing of the tomatoes. Details as we head in the country.
Join Andrew McRae for Farming the Countryside, a farmer-focused podcast that is all about production agriculture. Farming the Countryside is available wherever you listen to your favorite podcast and is brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services.
In news from our partners at Drovers, USDA is investigating a single case of atypical BSC. The disease was discovered in a 6-year-old beef cow in Florida. USDA says the animal never entered slaughter channels and is no threat to the food supply. There are 2 kinds of BSC, classical and atypical. Since USDA says this case is the atypical variety, it should not cause any trade issues. Classical BSC is linked to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in people. It's usually caused by contaminated feed. In other news from Drovers, a new study conducted by CoBank shows labor scarcity and wage inflation threaten the rural economy. Those issues also put additional stress on the profitability of the agricultural industry. CoBank says manual laborers are going after higher wages in other industries like construction and mining. As a result, farm employers are forced to increase wages at a higher rate to compete.
The scarcity of farm labor is also aggravated by the shrinking number of migrant workers. In addition to immigration controls like tightening borders and increased immigration enforcement, birth rates in Mexico are falling and populations are moving toward urban areas, leaving fewer people with agricultural backgrounds who would be interested in U.S. farm work.
CoBank says labor costs on all farms made up about 10% of gross income, while in the specialty crop sector, that share was closer to 27%. Still ahead, celebrating the success of another bountiful harvest of tomatoes. In the Country is next.
In the Country, sponsored by the all-new Kubota Sidekick, a utility vehicle that lets you climb more, cover more, tow more, and enjoy more. Visit KubotaUSA.com.
You work hard on your crop each season and celebrate the bounty at Thanksgiving. But in Spain, they celebrate in a different way. They pelt each other with tomatoes. Once again, it's tomato tossin' time in Spain. Each year, thousands of people gather for one of Europe's most exuberant food fights. More than 20,000 people took part in the annual Tomatina festival in eastern Spain. The town was turned into a red zone for an hour as people from Spain and around the world pelted each other with ripe tomatoes, leaving the streets flowing with pulp.
I definitely recommend this. It's an awesome experience. I want to definitely do it again. The people are great, everything is great, so many tomatoes. I don't know how many ketchup you can make out of it, but it's delicious.
160 tons of tomatoes were used in the event, distributed to a crowd by a fleet of 8 trucks. The festival was inspired by a food fight between local children in 1945. This area is Spain's prime tomato producing area. And that looks like fun. Maybe I'll have to participate next time around. Well, that's all the time we have this morning. We're glad you tuned in. For all of us here at AgDay, I'm Betsy Gibbon. Have a great day.